Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Will of IQBAR. Will, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Very normal childhood, upper middle class neighborhood in northern New Jersey, called Morristown. Um, had a big yard, played a lot of sports. Um, yeah, it was a good childhood.
Awesome. Just growing up, what was some of your aspirations? Were you into sports or lemonade stands? Any entrepreneurship endeavors along the way? What was that like?
No, I didn't. I think I had like a beanie bag or a beanie baby stand. I sold a variety of other things other than lemonade, but it
Hmm.
wasn't like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. It was just like, how do I make money to buy candy and stuff like that?
Oh, for sure.
Um, no, I was really obsessed with sports and soccer in particular, and then I got really obsessed with chess. So I was on the
Hmm.
chess team. Um, and those two things really like dominated my childhood.
Yeah.
So traveling to whatever other states to play in soccer tournaments or chess tournaments, was always on the road. So yeah, that was
Wow.
that was the focal points.
Yeah, just how long did you end up doing that? I'm curious. All the way up to college or through college? What did that look like?
No, well, so in high school I continued the soccer thing. I made varsity my freshman year, and so I was like, all right, I can play in college, and that became my primary goal through high school. Like, how do I get recruited to play college soccer? And as well as do well academically and whatnot. Ultimately, didn't play in college, but yeah, soccer. I'd stopped playing chess so much, although I play it for fun. I play online chess for fun, but
Yeah.
it really like narrowed down to soccer, and then yeah, didn't end up playing soccer in college because I got into Harvard off the wait list and was not good enough to play at Harvard. So
Hmm.
was what it was.
Yeah, let's get into Harvard I saw around 2010, but what was your time like there? What did you study when you went to Harvard? Curious.
I loved it. I loved it. Yeah, I made my best friends in my life that still today. Just like the classroom stuff was the least like enjoyable. I really, really loved one discipline, which was psychology and neuroscience, and then the rest I could kind of take it or leave it. But by far, my favorite part was just the people.
Mm.
You're around really smart people. It's also college. You're having fun. You're socializing. You're partying, and whatnot. So
Yeah.
it was just a really fun 4 years. I would not do it differently. I had a
Yeah.
blast.
No, for sure. What did you want to do post graduation? I did see some of your resume there, but like what were your aspirations going through Harvard? What did you expect to do? Did you get involved with entrepreneurship classes? Was that a thing with your
Yeah,
time there?
no, I did get really into the idea of entrepreneurship in college because entrepreneurship became cool. Like there was a
Yeah,
while where it wasn't cool. Like it wasn't that cool in the '90s. It was way cooler to go get a job at an investment bank or something.
for sure.
But it was kind of a weird move to start a business, let alone a CPG business.
Yeah.
But like when I was coming of age, high school, college, like it just got really cool, and so I was bitten by that bug, and I was like, all right, maybe I will start something at some point. And I had all these crazy ideas and would buy domain names I would never end up using. Like anyone who's been in entrepreneurship has bought a bunch of random domain names like at 1 a.m. on a Saturday. Uh, but yeah, and then I took one class. This is the thing about Harvard: like nothing they teach is practical.
Mm.
Uh, it's all like theoretical, and so.
Yeah.
But there was one entrepreneurship class, which I think was like co-taught by MIT or something, so it wasn't even a Harvard class. But it was so silly though. It was like the way it was run. It's funny, just like looking back now, having actually done entrepreneurship,
Yeah,
how just like not aligned with the realities of entrepreneurship that class was. I mean, any class, it's almost like an oxymoron,
for
like a
sure.
entrepreneurship class. Like you have to be doing the thing.
Yeah.
But we like theorized a product and I wrote a couple of papers on it and didn't even make a prototype or anything. So no, everything I learned about entrepreneurship was years later.
Yeah, before we get into IQ Bar, Let's talk post graduation. So I saw you did go, I mean, for just a little period, 3 or 4 years or so, Wood Mackenzie. So what led you to go there, and kind of what was that experience like before you fully started your own startup?
Yeah, yeah. So at Harvard, like the career services site, you can there's a bunch of jobs you can apply to just by checking a box and then pressing like apply. And then there's some where it's like there's 5 rounds of interviews and you have to submit like, an essay, and I was literally one of those check boxes. I just like checked it and applied, and I didn't. It was a software so I didn't start working at Wood Mackenzie. I worked at a software startup called Power Advocate that then got acquired by a big company called Verisk.
Okay.
And then Verisk also owned Wood Mackenzie, and they merged the two. But
I
so
see.
I applied to this company called Power Advocate, kind of a random little startup that sold software and consulting services to energy companies like utilities as well as oil and gas.
Yeah.
And I was like, whatever, checked it, showed up to the interview, like didn't not prepared, but had a good interview. They liked me, and then I got a job offer, and then I knew I didn't want to be a consultant. I knew I didn't want to be a banker, and so I was like, I guess I'll do this. Like, it sounds more fun. At the time, oil and gas was kind of booming actually, and then
Mm.
SaaS software as a service, that just
Yeah.
business model was booming with Salesforce and the like. So I was like, it's at the intersection of these really big trends. Like, I'll give it a go. But it was not. I wasn't like dying to do it. It was just like process of elimination.
No, for sure. Like, what was that role that you ended up getting?
It was like an internal SWAT team was how they kind of branded it. It was a bunch of ex-management consultants,
Mm.
really smart people, all like ex-Deloitte management consultants. And basically, like they were brought in by the CEO to build out the oil and gas market for that company. So
Yeah.
I would fly to Houston like every week. I would pitch $200,000 a year software, and the software was super arcane and
Mm.
esoteric. It was like, taking all their spend data, all the stuff they spent money on, and like reclassifying it and rendering it back to them in a really nice dashboard.
Mm.
Um, so and we did really well. We built out like a giant business, and then that startup got bought.
Mm.
But that was cool because it was the first experience I had where I was like, okay, this is how a startup works.
Yeah.
And then there's like this big outcome, and I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. I owned zero options,
Okay.
so I saw zero upside, but I was like, well, all those people saw a bunch of upside. That's kind of interesting. Um,
Yeah. Love it. So yeah, I'd like to get into that segue. I mean, kind of being a part of that startup, seeing an acquisition, but then IQBAR just shortly after comes in 2017. What was the realization behind kind of brain food and nutrients? Was it when you were at that startup? What was that story behind that?
yeah, it was not my first idea. I think it was like my 10th idea. But the thought process was I got actually quite good at my job, but I didn't like it. I
Yeah.
was good at it, but not passionate about it. I wasn't
Mm.
passionate about software or oil and gas. So I was like, I had a moment, like a come to Jesus moment where I was like, am I going to do this for 40 years? And I was like, no, basically I'm not. So what else am I going to do? I was 25, 26 at the time, and I read a book at that time called Mission in a Bottle by Seth Goldman and Barry Nailbuff, the story of honest tea.
Yeah.
And I just saw myself in this guy, Seth. He went to Harvard. Studied similar things to what I studied. He went into consulting, hated it, started honest tea, had a rocky road, exited. I was
Mm.
like, damn, that's so cool. I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
And so I started like thinking about like what consumer products can I make. I also wanted to make something. I've always wanted to make something that I made. And so I'm not an engineer, right? I'm not going to code a website or an app. It kind of that siphons things down to consumer goods.
Yeah.
And then reading that book, it got me really interested in food and bev consumer goods.
Mm.
Um, and so I just started like kicking around ideas, like where are the gaps in the market? What are big categories? Like I don't just want to build a mom and pop thing. I want to build like a big business. So it has to be a big category.
For sure.
And then also I was really interested in the brain, like I said, that from college. And so I was like, okay, brain food. Is
Mm.
this a thing? Like every ready to eat thing focuses on the body,
Yeah.
digestion, building muscle, weight loss. Like, why does nothing focus on the brain? And that was it. And there's no data on it. I was just like, all right, I'm going to make brain food in my kitchen and then run it and then do a Kickstarter. And if that works and enough people buy it, I'm going to quit my job and like just do that.
Wow. So what did that formulating process look like? Like, where do you look for those ingredients then, for the brain functioning ingredients to formulate?
Yeah. I mean, so basically what I did was I just had a spreadsheet and I just did a ton of research and I was basically just like, what is good for the brain, right? Omega-3s, MCTs, resveratrol, curcumin, yada, yada, yada. Like, let's say there's
Yeah.
like 30 things. And then I was like, all right, well, what are the whole food ingredients that are highest in all of those things? So for like vitamin E, it would be like almonds, sunflower seeds, chia seeds. Um, and and then I was just like, all right, here's all the things. Can I make a product out of it?
Mm.
And pretty quickly you start running into like micro compromise areas, right? So you would want to put curcumin in the bar, but now it's going to be a yellow bar. It's going to taste terrible. It's going to stain your fingers when you touch it. It's just not going to work, right? It's
Yeah.
going to be too expensive. Or resveratrol. Actually, it's tasteless, odorless. It could work in a bar, but now the bar is going to cost $15. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
So you just quickly economic realities collide with romantic theories about what you want to make.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, you just sort of like boil it down to, okay, this can work and can be economical and can taste good and can last on a shelf for a long time, yada, yada, yada. And that's
Sure.
what bars is a really hard category because it's like, it has to like I said, it has to last on a shelf for a long time. Has to stay moist, can't dry out. There's so many things that can go wrong. Of course, I didn't realize 90% of them
Yeah.
at that point, which is I had a useful naivete, put it that way.
So yeah, making that first bar, for example, both testing functionality, but how did you test flavor? Like, what flavor profile were you going for when you were first prototyping?
I had a misconception about like I knew nothing, right? So I didn't know anyone in consumer goods. I had never been in consumer goods. And so everything I did was just an educated guess, or I would call 10 people.
Yeah.
At first I just called every Boston-based CPG founder, and I
Mm.
just asked for 30 minutes of their time.
Yeah.
So our first three flavors were like almond cacao, blueberry walnut sunflower, matcha chai hazelnut, like super like Whole Foodsy. Oh, I might find this in a farmer's market type things.
Yeah.
And very quickly I realized like that is not the right way to go about making flavor profiles. Um, but you think like the quote unquote playbook that everyone I talked to gave was like, okay, start in natural and have something that appeals to that crowd, and then expand that concentric circle to eventually get conventional and this and that.
Yeah.
And I just found that to be the wrong playbook for us pretty quickly.
Mm. Getting into the Kickstarter, I know this is kind of where you launched. I'm curious, what did that kind of launch and campaign look like? Did you have a number of bars that you launched with? Was it just out of your kitchen at this point too? Like, what did that stage look like at launch of Kickstarter?
Yeah. So first of all, Kickstarter. First of all, I didn't. How do you start anything in consumer goods? Is an open question. There's,
Yeah.
either you like start making stuff in your kitchen and you sell it to your neighbors, and then eventually you get to a commissary kitchen and you make instead of hundreds, now you're making thousands, and you sell to more stores, and then you get that to the max and you get your first co-packer. Right. That's like
Yeah.
a way to do it.
Yep.
Another way is you make raise a bunch of money, or maybe you just have a bunch of money and you get your own facility and you make your own stuff, right? That's another way to do it.
Yep.
And then a third way to do it is what I did, which is probably the most stressful and chaotic way, but is create a lot of demand really quickly and go co-packer right out the gate.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, because I wanted to prove the idea or disprove the idea in a big way really quickly. I didn't want to drag something along and then realize 3 years down the line, oh wait, no one really wants this.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of Kickstarter. You can build up all that early demand, 2,500 orders or whatever it was, and then just start at the co-packer level. And then it's like, all right, how do I catch up and make sure like then the next demand, enough of those people reorder, and the
Yeah.
next wave of demand allows me to like manufacture a second time, because you have to hit that co-packer minimum.
Yeah.
And we did it. It was super, super stressful, but we did it. And that was a good way to just like start
Wow.
sprinting pretty damn quick.
Yeah, love it. So at that first order, for example, did you guys have a 3PL? How did that look like from the co-packer then to the Kickstarter?
Yeah. We got a 3PL right next to our co-packer. And yeah, started with D2C, started with a website.
Yep.
Still today, 6.5 years later, or whatever it is, or 6 years later, we are, oh, completely forgot what. Are you able to edit this out?
For sure. For
Okay,
sure.
cool. Can you just, what was the question?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so at this Kickstarter point, once that first order came in through the co-packer, you have a 3PL to fulfill all those orders. How did that
3PL.
look?
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, well, we got a 3PL right next to our co-packer. Um, and I mean, that's a whole other like journey, the whole 3PL journey. We are now on our, I think, fifth co-packer, and we went through 4 3PLs, and we now have our own warehouse. That's like we could do a whole podcast on the
Wow.
whole like build versus buy 3PL versus insourcing
For sure.
fulfillment thing. But yeah, right out the gate, I mean, it was just me. It was one person, and we were making 30,000 bars a clip, and had a 3PL fulfilling thousands of orders, and it was just me in my living
Wow.
room, right? So we had like a very small SG&A, small team, less is more mentality from the get-go, and that we never really grew out of that.
Yeah, no, I actually remember seeing one of your LinkedIn posts, I feel like a few months ago, emphasizing on like a lean team. So I would love to hear, at what point did you get that next employee and why, and what was the breaking point where you had to bring on someone? Curious.
So, I mean, the most basic division of labor in a company is someone has to like market and sell stuff, and someone has to make stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then the question is like, what do I want to do? And I wanted to market and sell stuff. And so it's like, okay, I need an ops person. At least this is how I thought about it. It's
Yeah.
interesting talking to other people, like what was the first hire they made. It's not always the same, but for me, that's like the logical division of labor. So
Yeah.
yeah, I hired this guy, Alex. He was right out of UNC Business School. I didn't know him. I got connected to him through a friend of mine.
Mm.
And I was like, hey, I can't pay you a ton, but this is what I can pay you. I'm a one-man show. Here's what we've done thus far. Are you interested? And he's like, yeah, I'm interested. So, and that was I mean, you grew your team by 100%, right? Like you double your capacity.
Yeah.
So in the early days, it's like each person you add is like, whoa, we grew by a lot,
Yeah.
team wise. And we were a 2-person team for a long time, like 9 months.
Wow.
And then we hired a creative director, which I think was probably a unique third hire, but worked out really well. And then I hired my wife to run e-commerce.
Wow.
And that, again, we could do a whole other podcast on that too.
Just as a touch point, can you disclose like the revenue per head on those employees? Like, I'm curious at like what size did you eventually scale employee wise?
I mean, there's like that classic benchmark of 1 million a head that people cite a lot. For us, we wanted to be at least 2 million a head.
Wow.
And I mean, now we're at close to, if we hit the goals that we're trying to hit, like 8 million a head.
Wow. Wow.
So, I mean, we've definitely, that like ratio has gotten more and more favorable
Yeah.
over time. And we can talk about why, but really primarily it's channel selection. But I also think like people matter, obviously. And it is a thing that one really good person can do the job of 2 or 3 pretty good or okay people. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
I think if you took any company in consumer goods, you can cut it in half
Yeah.
if you had the right people. People don't really realize that because they just sort of like hire ahead of demand, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a terrible mistake. I think you should hire when you're bursting at the seams.
Mhm.
And you might say, well, everything might fall apart. Okay, sure. Like nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
But let's take the counterfactual. Okay, you overhired and then you stalled out. It's like, what are you going to do? You have to fire those people. That's terrible for everyone involved.
Exactly.
You're probably not going to. You're going to drag it out for 6 months, even though you should have made the hard decision earlier. Like,
Mm.
I just think it's a way better to be like strained and then hire it like when you're bursting at the seams than like overhire earlier. But that used to be the model, right? Like the old school model was hire a ton of people, raise a ton of money, and just like move everyone sprinting. And
Yeah.
obviously now that model is not very favorable.
No, for sure. At what point did you guys then roll into retail? You shifted from D2C, both the mix of retail, and what was that first retailer? I'm curious.
Oh man, our first retailer was CVS, which was a
Mm.
ill-conceived adventure on our part. Again, we knew nothing. Like every time we did something for the first time, we did it terribly, and then like learned,
Yeah.
and then didn't make the mistake again. So yeah, CVS was local-ish. They're in Providence, and we're in Boston.
Mm.
And I just knew a friend who got into CVS. There's so many doors, and you're like, dang, I could get into 3,000 doors, 4,000 doors, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, he connected me with a buyer, and one thing led to another. The buyer was like, yeah, I'll pilot this. Pilot went well, got into, I think it was 3,300 doors or something like that.
Yeah.
And we got like a $700,000 PO. We're like, oh my God, like this is crazy.
Yeah.
We weren't even 6 months into selling our first carton of bars, and
This was 2017.
This was 2018. So
2018.
we finished the Kickstarter in Jan 18, fulfilled our first order in I think early July 18. But then like before 18 was up, we had gotten this PO.
Wow.
So we're like, whoa. And then we had to on the fly switch co-packers. We said yes. They're like, can you do this? And we're like, yeah. And they're like, holy shit, how are we going to do this? So we had to switch co-packers from the West Coast to the East Coast. It was like the only co-packer who would produce, because we went from making like, call it 20, 30,000 bars a clip to 200, 300,000 bars a clip. And then, I mean, there's some like horror stories. Our wrappers didn't seal properly for that first CVS order, which was a total nightmare, and a bunch of stuff broke. And then CVS turned out to be kind of a rough go of it because we were in kind of a random set in the back corner. Anyway, I actually wouldn't do that differently either, though, because that got us a ton of revenue, which allowed us to raise $1 million. Right? We were broke. I was personally broke. The company was broke. Like, we had no money.
Yeah.
So that allowed us to raise $1 million at a pretty good valuation because we're like, hey, we're in all these doors and we have all this revenue, and then we were able to like use that to really ramp up e-commerce. And that turned out to be like, I wouldn't say the cash, like not the cash cow, but the top line cow.
For sure.
That really started propelling the business.
For sure. What do you think picked up some of the early demand, and what was the content like that you guys were pushing? Was it more education, the taste? I mean, brain food is fairly new at this point for consumers. I'm curious, what worked well for you?
It depends on the channel.
Yeah.
E-commerce is so different than Wegmans is, than Kroger is, than
For
Walmart is. So, but generally speaking, what we learned is people care the most about, like, keto was a giant thing, right? So they cared a lot about net carbs for a very long time. So we rode that wave, and then keto plateaued and is now kind of declining, right? So we've had to ride each like coming incremental wave, but not allow the wave to make us crash.
Yeah.
I mean, how many keto brands now are done or, on their last breath? A lot.
Yeah,
So how do you avoid that, but still ride that wave when it comes?
for sure.
And so, yeah, like low sugar, low net carb was huge during that period. And then, plant protein got really important. Um, but it's, generally speaking, people buy bars for the same things, and they always have, like
Mm,
protein count, protein source,
yeah,
sugar and net carbs, or total carbs, and then like how clean is the label, how good does it taste, what's the price.
yeah,
Um, so you have to like allow them to check, and then you can tell your more nuanced story of, oh, but also vitamin E and magnesium and this and that.
yeah,
But if you don't check those 5 boxes first, like you don't even get the
sure,
opportunity to pitch that.
for sure. At what point, you mentioned earlier that you guys are fulfilling your own orders now. Did you switch from the 3PL to then warehousing yourself? What point was that?
I mean, that was years and years in. We just started doing that a year and a half ago.
Okay.
I mean, it was very hard. We had to find a space. We had to hire a number of people. It's not as intense as doing your own manufacturing, but it's like a baby version of that. Like,
Yeah,
because like I said, you got to find the space, people. How are we going to organize this? None of us have set up a warehouse before. Like, you're learning it on the go.
yeah,
But at the end of it, after like a year of just total grinding, now you have your own space. And there's like, we just realized at one point over the years, like all of our problems are like fulfillment related. Like because you had to be nimble and, hey, we need to get this pallet out here and we need to get this kitted over here and need to get these into Amazon. And we were like always going out of stock.
mm,
And once we built the warehouse, that we could like handle that, all of those things. We were so much more nimble.
yeah,
Before someone would be like, no, I'm not going to kit that on a Friday night.
no,
And
for sure.
now it's like, no, actually, we can do that.
Yeah,
And so it added way more slack to our system
mm,
and allowed us to absorb a lot more variability
mm,
and just allowed us to be faster, do things cheaper. I mean, it was a great move.
no, for sure. Where is that fulfillment center that you guys have right now?
It's in the Midwest.
Okay, perfect. Did you guys come across any issues or do you like based off of weather changes and shipping bars, and how do you guys gauge that when shipping?
Weather changes.
Like for like hot summer days, for example. I mean, Midwest, I would say, is definitely ideal for where you guys are based right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we made products that can withstand weather, I guess is how I would respond to that.
Yeah,
I think, if you look at a lot of the best performing bars or just like ready to eat things, they're covered in chocolate.
yeah,
And that's awesome for brick and mortar. And it's terrible for e-commerce
yeah,
because for 4 or 5 months out of the year, like you can't ship economically to Texas or Florida or whatever.
yeah,
And so that like as an e-commerce business, that's not good. E-commerce first business.
yeah,
So we just kind of made the decision, hey, we're not going to enrobe stuff in chocolate. Like we're going to make XYZ product decisions like for business model purposes. Like um, so that's how that factored in.
for sure.
And I'm glad we did that, honestly. There are brands like Bear Bells and stuff who are just absolutely crushing it. And it's coated bars and
Yeah,
that's cool. But they have a different business model. They're not an e-commerce first business.
oh, totally. What percentage would you say today is selling to both e-commerce and then to your retail overall?
Last year it was 2/3 e-com, 1/3 brick and mortar. This year I think it'll be 40% brick and
Okay.
mortar, maybe
Yeah,
40, low 40s.
yeah, for sure. I did see that you guys rolled into, I mean, not just bars, but you're rolling into like mixes and also coffee alternatives. What was your visualization from that? Was that from early on launching IQBAR? When did that kind of surface?
Well, I think early on, this is like such an interesting topic. The whole, do you go really deep on one form factor or do you platformize, quote unquote? Because there's all these risks to platformizing. And a lot of people will say, don't do that. Like, that's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
The best businesses in the world, Athletic Greens, let's say, it's like one SKU, you just scale that to the nth degree, you get all the efficiencies out of it, and yada yada. And by the way, it's easier on the exit side too, right? Because you have corp dev people at Mondelez or what have you, and they're like, I want to buy a bar company. And then you're like, well, we do bars, but we also do this and that. Like, what?
Yeah.
I don't want that. I didn't get a mandate to buy that.
Yeah.
So, and then also on the efficient, like you add administrative burden, and on the efficiency side, right?
Mm.
So all of that is true. But I have a highly contrarian, what appears to be a highly contrarian perspective on it, which is it's still worth it in certain circumstances. And we, I think, fit in those circumstances. So the IQBAR brand, to me, that brain and body nutrition brand could scale across multiple occasions throughout the day and multiple form factors. And if we were really thoughtful about our channel strategy and channel selection, we could mitigate administrative burden. And if we picked categories that had super high gross margins out the gates, it wasn't that big a deal that we wouldn't have a ton of scale. And we have fixed SG&A, right? If we thought we could take it on, it's incremental. So anyway, there's a whole variety, and we didn't pick the products lightly. Like we looked at every category. We're like, what's most relevant to brain and body? What's hot right now? What's big and growing? What do we think we could win in? And so, hydration and coffee were two that we thought were awesome. There's others we didn't pursue that I really like, sleep being one of them.
Yeah.
Maybe we tackle that, maybe we don't. But yeah, I think overall it's been super positive because now we can, like, again, e-com first. You do certain things that brick and mortar first people don't do. So it works really well for e-com because now you can upsell people.
For sure.
So when buys a bunch of bars, well, it's easier to be like, oh, throw in some hydration instead of like, oh, buy like your 6th box of bars. Like there's only so many bars someone can buy. So how do you build that cart? One way is offer diverse offerings that hit different occasions and are non-cannibalizing.
For sure. Looking at IQBAR today, just as we're wrapping up here, what would you say is that top seller? And does that compare to the bar market, would you say, as well?
Our top seller is chocolate sea salt on the bar side, which, I mean, this is like dovetails with what we started with, which was I had all these like wacky Whole Foodsy kind of like, cacao almond sea salt that evolved into chocolate sea salt. I think I just copied RX Bar. I was like, what is their best seller? Chocolate sea salt. All right, I'm going to call it that. But no, actually the fastest growing category for us is hydration. Hydration, like the whole business grew 116% last year.
Wow.
But hydration grew like 300%. I think it'll grow another 300% this year. So smaller base, right? Like smaller revenue dollars, but that's the fastest growing. But top SKU would be chocolate sea salt.
Incredible. Well, I like to conclude each episode with this. If you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned, regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
I don't know how interesting this would be, but is get your personal house in order. Like, I think the hardest part of startups is not doing startups. It's managing your expectations, energy, personal relationships, romantic relationships, sleep, like blah, 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 over a long period of time. And in CPG, what has become apparent is the people who win are doing it over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Like, you got to have stamina and you got to make a bunch of personal decisions to allow you to persevere or like nothing. It doesn't matter how good your idea is or how good your product market fit is or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I've just found like managing yourself in your own house, keeping that in order is like the single most important thing. And then dovetailing with that would be like your team has to be this organism that has resilience too, right? Everyone else has to feel like they're rowing in the same direction and all that.
For sure. Amazing. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining me today. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out IQBAR at iqbar.com.